Hello and welcome to Pensions in 10 with me, David Brooks, and my colleague Andy Knight-Stevens. This week, we talk you through the Regulator's annual funding statement. We take a look at the potential for Mansion House 2, and we look at the latest podcast from the Pensions Regulator on VFM.
Okay, Dave, so TPR has released its annual funding statement. That was on the 29th of April. So the statement is particularly relevant for trustees and sponsors of DB schemes, especially those undertaking actuarial evaluations between September 2024 and September 2025. So I think, Dave, you've been looking at the detail of what it says. So over to you here.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Andy. Yeah, so every year we get the State of the Union of the DB landscape. And as usual, they start with a few stats. So we've got some stats on the position in aggregate of pension scheme sort of funding. So they're saying around 80% of schemes are now in surplus on technical provisions basis, and over 50% in surplus on a buyout basis. I don't know if I entirely believe that. I know it's all based on modelling and projections and assumptions and things that no one knows for sure because of the cycle of valuations and the data collected and all the rest of it. But whatever, it can't be too far from the truth, I suppose. And so it is evident and clear from the statement itself, from the tone, that the regulator finds itself regulating a DB universe which is far less risky than it used to be, with a lot of the funding risk and investment risk locked down. And that is why I suspect one of the reasons why the vast majority of the statement is actually in the appendices, looking at the queries around covenant assessment. And so the employer covenant feels like for many of those schemes, perhaps the 80%, the scheme's not quite a buyout, so the 50% of schemes, let's say, that aren't quite at a buyout basis funding, then the employer is the Achilles heel. That's the last thing that can possibly go wrong. And so monitoring that employer covenant is now incredibly important. And so the focus of the regulator does seem to be on that. Noting throughout and nearly every paragraph that trustees and the regulator will be and should be pragmatic and proportionate relative to the funding position of the scheme and the employer covenant. I don't know I know you've read it too, Andy, so I don't know what your takeaways from it were.
Yeah, similar to you, David, but a few supplemental comments, I suppose. I thought it was quite interesting. It's only about 50% in surplus on a buyout basis, so there's still life there in the industry. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I guess so from an investment perspective, so obviously it's really an interesting update because of the new DB funding code and the regime there. So obviously there's a bit of detail and provides guidance for schemes there on what to do. Obviously, again, emphasizing that risk-based approach, outcome-focused approach. Geopolitical uncertainty and economic uncertainty is referenced into that it could impact investment strategies. That's always been there, though, hasn't it? Geopolitical and economic uncertainty, but it's pulled out specifically, and again, and key, but it's pulled out again. Climate change is noted and it's highlighted. It's something trustees should be actively considering. Because they put out some recent guidance, so it's mentioned again. So I guess for our listeners, it should be something that's being considered. And then I guess one more thing from me: use of surplus. So it's talked about in the report, but there'll be more announcements coming there in the summer around potential release of surplus and what can and can't be done. So it's an interesting update.
Yeah. Also, there's some things there. There's still more to come. So we've got a consultation on the statement of strategy, which will be coming in this summer, might be the summer, and also endgame guidance as well coming through in the spring/summer. And that surplus stuff you're referring to will be in the pension schemes bill, which I might have to do a pension in 10 special on the pension schemes bill, which is becoming potentially one of the largest pension bills ever. It seems to be so many things getting thrown in there. But yeah,
you'll have to, Dave. There's so many consultations and responses.
Yeah,
it's quite hard for trustees and sponsors to keep track, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll do that. Yeah, definitely do that. Now, if you're struggling, then everybody else must be. So yeah.
I didn't say I was struggling. I just said
that's to be fair. Okay, Andy. So if the rumour mill is to be believed, any day now we should be getting an update from Rachel Reeves on the government's long-term interest in pension schemes investing in productive finance. So we're expecting Mansion House Compact 2 the return of the Mansion House Compact or something. I don't know. So what are your thoughts on the direction of travel, what you've been hearing, and what this might mean for trustees investing in these asset classes?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So obviously let's see what the announcement is. And you said rumours there, but it's about 2 years after launch of the initial Mansion House Compact, July 2023. So that was signatories pledging, so no actual sort of laws, pledging to allocate at least 5% of DC default assets to unlisted or private equity by 2030. So the rumour mill this time is seeing providers potentially commit to investing 10% of assets into unlisted equities by 2030. So that's double, 5% to 10%. And half of that devoted to UK private equity. So that's the kind of update. I think there were a number of people who've signed up regarding the initial Mansion House Compact and various figures. So good progress. I guess it was about a year ago now. So it was about 800 million. It was said was in unlisted equities, but actually, if you look at that as a percentage, so compare that to the 5%, which was in the pledges, it was kind of under 0.4%, so not there yet. And I think a number of operators in the industry commented there were difficulties, operational and technical barriers to investing in private assets. So without naming names, I think there's a few people who've said, and a few companies, a stronger pipeline of UK assets would be useful. There's some thought that perhaps the current availability of UK private assets there is just not going to provide a strong enough return for investors. So a bit of a drive is needed there. And then I guess there's this tension between sort of immediate cost versus longer term return for members and adequacy, which I'm all for, right? So better long-term saving returns. But I guess we need to be a bit careful that there's obviously a strong push from government to invest in UK PLC. There's a strong push on illiquid assets, and I think we need to be careful. So some of these types of assets, private equity, can come with increased risk. So they can come with greater expected returns as well, but we have to be conscious of the risk. And I think we just need to be a bit careful here, in my opinion. The other thing is, having said that, this is 5 or going up to 10% allocations in default funds. So it's not the majority of the allocation. So perhaps it's all okay. But there's a lot of noise on, Dave, I think, on productive finance and the word productive assets or productive finance. For me, productive asset can just be GDP positive. It's productive. So, a corporate bond could still be a productive asset. So I think we need to be a bit careful with some of this speak and some of the government's initiative here. There's ideological thinking and all of that, and they can come with increased costs. But I think there's a lot of speculation here, and I'm just saying some positives, some negatives. If this type of initiative can increase long-term returns for members, that would be great. It'd be very nice. I think we just need to be careful on sort of the government and their agenda as well. But it's all speculation. We'll wait and see what the Chancellor says in the announcements.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your kind of candor really there, because we've got to sort of think through we get this sort of umbrella desire for the government to do X and Y and these kind of things, but what will it actually mean when trustees sit down with their investment consultant and their investment advisors going, what are the opportunities? What are we actually investing in? What is this? Is this the right time to be doing this stuff? So I know 2030 is a long way away. Anything can happen, but maybe coming into these things slowly, carefully is the right way to do it. And it will be perhaps a more drawn out phasing in of these allocations. Maybe 2030 is just too soon. I mean, it feels 5 years doesn't feel that long in the big scheme of things.
Yeah, that's interesting. And if those comments are to be believed, that there's potentially not the opportunities in UK private assets there yet, that speaks to long-term, perhaps incremental increase to that allocation rather than it being immediately able to get there. The other thing as well, just a final point, Dave, is of course The more modern investment strategy and allocation thinking is you'll go for the best risk-adjusted returns, and geography it does come into it, and FX hedging and all of that. But you'll go for the best risk-adjusted returns. So it might be it's UK PLC, that's great, but it might be if the best returns on a risk-adjusted basis are elsewhere, that could be difficult for the UK government's agenda as well.
Okay, so the final thing I want to talk about today, Andy, was a podcast that I listened to, and I know you listened to it 3 times, which was held between FCA and the Pensions Regulator, talking about the VFM framework, or the Value for Members framework, which is coming through. Obviously, we know this is going to be in the Future Pension Schemes Bill. FCA has been consulting on it, and it is a tricky area, I think, for both regulators to deal with. You've got the contract-based world with the FCA, and Nikkei Trust was covering that, and you have Patrick Coyne from the regulator talking about the trust-based world. How these two worlds meet into a system that sort of it enables members and employers to sort of assess the marketplace in a fair way is not an easy challenge. And so they're talking through the various bits around that, around how you measure performance, whether you're just past looking or whether you do have some kind of forward looking metrics. And this consultation has been ongoing. It's going to be a tricky one. I don't know. I listened to it once. You listened to it 3 times, so maybe you've got a better handle on some of the takeaways.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think it's going to be really difficult here. Yeah. So just to balance what the metrics are and what they're trying to achieve. But I think overall it's a really good thing, right? So it's about transparency and better decision making, and then sort of long-term value outcomes for members. So I think we'll struggle to find a listener that is arguing that they're not good things. So I think that's really good. And it's more of a mindset shift, right? So what they're announcing isn't going to be the be all and end all. That's just going to be a tool, that framework. But it's a mindset shift from that immediate cost, because something like, productive finance or and liquid asset could have a higher immediate cost, but maybe it could have longer term more or a higher value for members. So it's that shift to the long term value. So it's interesting, but you've got all these industry players involved, and one thing I'll pull out was they talked about maybe a RAG status on how you can compare different schemes and whatnot, and that itself could be difficult, and maybe that's not where they're going, but it just highlights the issues, right? So if one provider or a number of providers are ranked green and the others are simplified to amber or red, commercially that's not going to be palatable for those providers, and it could obviously mean low flows or no flows to those providers. So maybe industry there won't get on board with it. And then no flows or less flows mean they can't improve or less chance of improving towards green. So it's really difficult on how they're going to implement this. But I think definitely the ethos and the thinking behind it is really good for members. It's just how will it be done?
Okay, we'll put a link to the podcast in the comments under our LinkedIn post for this, so you can go and listen for yourselves.
Okay, this is just to say thank you to all the listeners, and Dave will be with you next time. And thanks for engaging.